Hi guys, Jamie Humphries here and welcome to another Mesa Boogie video and part 3 of our deeper look at CabClone IR. In this video we're going to be looking at CabClone IR in a live situation and how you can integrate CabClone IR into your live rig for both silent performance and attenuation. We're also going to be taking a look at how you can utilize the Midi switching using a floor-based effects unit, and as well as that we are going to be looking at how you can use not one but two CabClone IRs to integrate into your rig for a silent wet dry wet rig. I'm also going to be closing this video with a performance of a John Petrucci style backing track where I'll be demonstrating live switching going through 3 different guitar sounds using 3 different channels on my JP head, using 3 different presets that I've come up with on my chosen effects unit, and simultaneously I'll be switching 3 different presets on CabClone IR. Okay, let's get started by first of all taking a look at attenuation. I'd like to take a moment now to look at the attenuator on CabClone IR Plus, and this is a really versatile tool and it just goes to prove what a Swiss Army knife the CabClone IR Plus is. It's got so many different applications. So far we've been using it on the load setting, so there's been no sound coming out the cabinet. We've been just using the impulse responses. If I flick over now to speaker, the speaker is engaged. I'm using the Recto 2x12 cabinet and I'm mic'd up with a Lewitt LCT 440 pure condenser microphone. I should point out as well that if I had the track armed in Cubase behind me, I could also, as well as recording the sound of the cabinet, could also record the sound that's coming out of with the impulse responses. So I could be maybe capturing my 2x12, but then I could be recording a 4x12. So you can get some different combinations of a live cabinet and impulse responses, or whatever combination you want to use. Anyway, this is going to be really loud. I'm using my mini rec still. This is a real powerhouse of an amplifier, so if you see me wincing, it is because it's quite loud. At the moment I've got it set to 0, so we are not using any attenuation at the moment. So here we go. Okay, so now I'm going to notch back to -4. Let's have a listen. Now I'm going to go back to -8, so it's becoming a little bit more comfortable for me in my studio. Now I'm going to go to -12. Let's have a listen to that. And then finally to -16. This is really cool when you have it on the -16 setting. So as you can hear, there's lots of control there from the attenuator section of CabClone IR Plus. Now let's take a look at another application for using CabClone IR live. In fact, we are not using one CabClone IR, we are going to use 2. As I have a pair of them with me in the studio at the moment, I thought it would be an ideal opportunity to look at producing a silent wet dry wet setup. Traditionally, wet dry wet rigs consist of either 3 amplifiers or an amplifier with a power amp and 3 cabinets. So it takes up quite quite a lot of real estate on stage, not to mention gear transportation as well. So you can really scale things down a lot by using a pair of CabClone IRs. I'm a big fan of wet, dry, wet setups, and I've always loved Eddie Van Halen's tone when he uses the wet, dry, wet rig, and also Brian May. And I had the pleasure of being in Brian May's band several years ago, and used to hear that majestic tone every night, and from that point on I was really hooked at trying to find a way to introduce wet, dry, wet into my rig. Now, as I've mentioned already, I do quite a lot of gigs where I have to be silent. Now, this is my touring rig. This is a road ready setup. It's a rack and switching system that integrates with the JP2C, but now I can take that on tour with me with just a pair of CabClone IRs. Now, don't think to yourself, I have to have some huge rack system or something. This is just a culmination of many years of touring and different productions and tours that I've done that have resulted in me having this custom rack built. But I also do a similar setup where I use the mini rec, the CabClone IRs, and just a floor-based multi-effects unit, the Line 6 HX effect, and it will work equally as well. So for those of you that are unfamiliar with what a wet, dry, wet setup is, wet, dry, wet is a routing where you have the middle cabinet completely dry and then the outer cabinets 100% wet. So those effects will be delay or chorus and any kind of modulation that you desire, reverbs and such. And what you get there is you get this real direct punch and definition with that completely unaffected raw amp tone. And then on the outside, you get these beautiful effects, so it produces width and separation between your guitar sound and your effects. I always had the effects in the send and return of the JP2C, and then I started to experiment using the CabClone IR and discovered that I can actually power my effects with a second unit. So the way that the rig is working at the moment, I'm coming out of the JP2C speaker output and I'm going into the CabClone IR Plus. Now that's taking my load. I'm using a standard 4x12. I want that big, rich sound with the bottom end and, you know, that full tone. And then I'm coming out of the dry output, which is, it's got no effect, it's got no impulse response on it, it's just that DI'd tone from the amplifier. And I'm going into the line in of the second CabClone IR. Now the reason I'm going into the line in is because the load has already been taken. So we don't need to go into the input where it's expecting to take a load. I'm just going into the input where I might plug a preamp pedal or a preamp unit. And then I've selected a 2x12 recto cabinet on the affected side of things. I wanted a slightly different tone. I wanted a not maybe so much low end thud, but I wanted a little bit more mid and upper mid to the sound so that you really get that separation between the dry signal and the effects. And then what I'm doing, I'm coming out of the XLR out of this CabClone and I'm going into the back of the rack and that's driving my effects. I then come out of the rack in stereo into a pair of DI boxes and then that goes straight into my recording setup. So I'm using 3 channels now going into Cubase. So I have a stereo pair, and I also then have a single mono dry signal. It's really important to remember that if you do experiment with this setup, it's important that your effects are 100% wet. You don't want any dry signal blend with your effects because you'll get dreadful phasing issues. Now, talking of phasing, you can also get phasing issues running 2 units in this manner. Obviously, the sound, the time it's taking for the sound to hit one unit and then go into the other, there's going to be a slight delay between them, so you can get some phasing. So what I've done is I've flipped the phase control on the second CabClone. Okay, so now let's have a listen to some tones. Before we do that, I'd just like you to hear the separation of the sounds. I think this is quite interesting. So first of all, let's take a listen to the direct dry signal. Okay, so that was my dry tone using the standard 4x12 cabinet. Now let's have a listen to the affected tone. This is going to be a little bit strange because there is going to be a slight delay between what I play and what you hear because you're only hearing the affected sound. But this is the affected tone. On this sound, I'm using like an ambient reverb and a tri-chorus. And I'm using the 2x12 Recto cabinet. Let's have a listen. Okay, so that was my stereo effect tone with no dry signal. Let's now have a listen to the mighty sound of wet, dry, wet. We can hear all of it mixed together. Now let's have a listen to three tones and you can hear how well this setup works and how utilising a pair of CabClone IRs into your live rig can really give it a lot of punch and definition, but also a lot of width. It's that separation of effects that I find so appealing about wet, dry, wet, and you can now achieve that silently, which I think is really cool. We're going to kick off with a clean tone. This is a John Petrucci inspired clean tone. I love John's clean tones. I think they're absolutely stunning. I'm using channel 1 of the JP2C. As I said, that's direct speaker out into the CabClone IR Plus. We have the 4x12 standard Recto cab going direct into the audio interface, feeding into the CabClone IR, and then that is outputting into the back of the rack, and then we're coming out the rack in stereo, and that's 100% wet signal. And I'm using a reverb and a chorus here. I'm also adding a compressor pedal on the front end for this tone. So let's have a listen. Now let's take a listen to our second tone. This is my crunch rhythm tone. I'm using channel 2 of the JP2C. And for effects, I'm using a tri-chorus sound from the Modulation Pro, and there's a bit of room ambience to give a bit of space coming from the TC unit. So let's have a listen to the tone. Now for our third and final tone, and this is an example of a lead tone. I'm using channel 3 of the JP2C with shred mode engaged, and I'm using a stereo delay from the Echo Pro. I've got a slightly different delay time on each side, so you get a nice amount of spread with the delays going from either side. You know, I'm just really trying to showcase how well utilizing the two CabClone IRs into your live rig can achieve a very effective wet, dry, wet setup. Let's have a listen to the tone.
CabClone IR is equally at home in your live rig as it is in the studio. Now, one of the great features of CabClone IR is the Midi switching. Now, how cool would it be to be on a gig and have different speaker cabinets for your different tones? Maybe you want a 4x12 for your thick, crunchy rhythm tones, maybe a 2x12 or a 1x12 for your lead tones, and an open back 1x12 or 2x12 cabinet for your clean tones. Now, not only would that involve a truckload of gear, lots of miking and some kind of switching system to enable you to change speakers, so it's not always going to be possible for us to have that luxury. But with CabClone IR, this is achievable. Through MIDI switching from either an effects unit or a MIDI equipped amplifier or a MIDI controller, it's possible for you to change the different patches or different presets, should I say, on CabClone IR. CabClone IR recognizes MIDI program change commands, with MIDI programs 1 to 8 corresponding with CabClone IR's Bank A 1 to 8 presets, and MIDI program changes 9 to 16 corresponding with Bank B 1 to 8. Now, the connection was very, very straightforward. I'm using HX Effects, which is purely an effects unit. There's no amp modeling in this unit. I'm not connecting this 4 cable. I'm only using 2 cables into the send and return of my JP2C, so I'm using it purely for modulation, reverb and delay. And what I've done is I've got a 5-pin MIDI cable coming out of HX Effects. That's going into CabClone IR Plus, and then I'm coming from the through of CabClone IR Plus into the MIDI in of the JP2C. To give you an example of how simple this was to set up, I've gone onto the first preset bank here, user presets, and I've made 3 presets for this demonstration. I'm on 13A, and when I select 13A, you can see it's selecting preset number 1 on bank A. If I go to 13B, preset 2, 13C, that's preset 3, D, 4. If I go up to the next bank to 14, we continue through all of the presets. Once I go up to bank 15, preset 15, sorry, I'm now on bank B. So you can see how simple it is just to get this to correspond with a MIDI device straight out the box. Obviously, with more in-depth MIDI mapping, you wouldn't have to scroll through the different banks, but I just wanted to keep things nice and simple. Now, for our final demonstration track, I've tried to treat this as a live performance. I wanted to show you how simple it is during a performance to change not only different effects patches for your desired sound, not only the channels on the amplifier, but also your speaker cabinets. Adding different speaker cabinets to your rig is really inspiring, and it really does change the tone of your amplifier. So what I've done here, I've had 3 tones in mind. I have my main rhythm tone, and for that I was using a 4x12 traditional recto cab. Then for my lead tone, if I go onto that, I was using the traditional 4x12, and then when I go to my clean channel, I opted to use a 2x12 closed back recto cab. So you can see how easy it is for me to achieve a wide variety of tones in a live application. I've got an effects unit that has delay, chorus, modulation. It's got MIDI switching options, running into the effects loop of my JP2C, which is also a MIDI switchable amp, 3 channels, 2 graphic EQs,
and that's connected to the CabClone IR Plus, where I'm able to change different impulse responses, different types of speaker cabinets, different microphone options. One cable out of that, one XLR out, straight to the PA, straight to the sound man, and I'm good to go. I don't even need to have a speaker cabinet. This can all be monitored using in-ear monitors. If I do wish to have a speaker cabinet on stage though, I can use my 2x12 cab here. I can switch from load to speaker, and I can have some sound on stage for my cab if I want to get feedback. But also on top of that, if my amp is too loud on stage where I've got it set, maybe I want to really drive it to get the certain tone that I'm after, I can utilize the attenuator to set a comfortable on-stage sound for my cabinet. So you can really appreciate how versatile this rig is, and all of it can be achieved just by simply switching on my effects unit. So there we have it, able to change speaker cabinets, amp channels, effects, everything just by switching the effects unit on the floor. Really, really versatile and compact rig. Now we're going to play out with my John Petrucci Dream Theater style track. Slight disclaimer, I'm by no means trying to play like John. That would not be possible, but the writing and the arrangement of the track has some recognizable references to Dream Theater, and there's a couple of licks that I am able to achieve that I put in just for fun. I'm going to be doing all of the switching of the effects and the channels and the impulse responses live. I'm not dropping in, I'm just playing one sound after another. So hopefully I'll get my my effects changes in time so we get seamless changes. And you know, I'm just trying to show you how this would be in a live environment, maybe on a gig. So I'm going to imagine I have an audience here. Obviously, I'm sitting in my studio, so it's a slightly fake environment, but maybe I'm doing a webcast, a live webcast, or maybe I'm doing a guitar clinic. So I'm just trying to show you how easy it is to do all of the switching live. So I really hope you enjoy the track. Thank you so much for tuning in. I've really enjoyed taking an in-depth look at CabClone IR. I really hope that it's shown you how easy it is to set up and utilize either in your studio or in a live rig. I hope it's shown you how many options it has, whether you're using the attenuator or if you're just using the impulse response side of things. Or you can bypass the impulse responses and come straight from the line out and use your favorite impulse responses. Maybe you have a different loader on your computer in your studio. Personally, I really love the layout of CabClone IR. It's no fuss. It's, you know, I like to turn dials and knobs on an amplifier, and this is how you get your tone. You just plug in and off you go. It's a fantastic unit. So that's it from me. Thank you so much for sticking with me through these 3 videos. I've had a lot of fun putting them together, and I look forward to seeing you very soon in more Mesa Boogie videos. Bye for now.